A lot of people didn't notice when it started. There wasn't one big moment. No scandal. No meltdown. No headline that screamed something's wrong. It was subtle. Timothée Chalamet didn't fall off. He slowly shifted. And now, people are starting to feel it. Because there's always that moment in a celebrity's trajectory where something changes, not in their talent, not in their success, in how they feel to the public. And when that shift happens, it's almost impossible to reverse overnight. For years, Timothee had one of the most powerful advantages in Hollywood. Mystique, he barely talked. He didn't over-explain himself. He gave just enough to be interesting. And then disappeared again. That silence allowed people to project whatever they wanted onto him. Depth, intelligence, artistic purity. Ivan, Himilenwu, guy special. And that's the easiest position to be in. Because when people build your image for you, they protect it. Defend it. They fill in your blanks with their own admiration. But that only works as long as you don't interrupt the illusion. And that's where things started to change. Because recently, he started talking more. A lot more. And not just talking, explaining himself, defining himself, positioning himself. And that's always a risky move when your brand is built on mystery. Because the more you explain who you are, the less room people have to imagine it. And imagination is what made people love him in the first place. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was just small things. Award speeches where he talked about chasing greatness. Interviews where he casually compared himself to legends. Comments where he described his own performances as top level. Now, look, ambition is not the problem. Wanting to be great is not the problem. Every top actor thinks that. But there's a difference between believing it and saying it out loud in a way that feels like you expect everyone to agree. Because the moment you start declaring your greatness, you shift the burden to the audience. Now they're not discovering it. They're evaluating it. And people don't like being told what to think. They like feeling like they figured it out themselves. That S psychology. And Timothee's shift broke that dynamic. Then came the comment that really stuck. The one about ballet and opera, where he basically said he doesn't want to work in spaces where people are trying to keep something alive that no one cares about anymore. Now here's the important part. If that had come from a random celebrity, it probably would have passed. One bad take, one bad moment, move on. But it didn't land like that, because it didn't feel isolated. It felt like confirmation. Confirmation of a pattern people were already starting to notice. And once a pattern clicks in people's minds, everything starts to connect. Suddenly, it's not just a comment. It's this is who he is becoming. And that's when perception shifts. Because people didn't just hear what he said. They heard what it implied. That he sees certain art forms as irrelevant. That he positions himself above them. That he's comfortable dismissing entire disciplines publicly. And here's where it gets even more complicated. Timothee's entire image was built on being connected to that artistic world. The indie films, the European influence, the serious actor energy. That aesthetic leaned heavily on the same cultural space he just dismissed. So when you turn around and say those spaces don't matter anymore, it creates a contradiction, and audiences feel contradictions instantly. Even if they can't fully explain them. That's what happened here. Then came the response. And it wasn't quiet. People from the ballet world spoke up. Opera voices pushed back. Artists reminded everyone that these forms are still very much alive. And not just alive, foundational. Misty Copeland, one of the most respected figures in ballet. essentially reminded people that these art forms are part of the same ecosystem that gave actors like Timothee credibility in the first place. It wasn't aggressive, but it was clear, and when someone like her speaks, Beopli lisan, then something interesting happened. Steven Spielberg stepped in, indirectly. He started praising ballet and opera in a public setting, talking about their importance, their role in shared artistic experience. And the room understood exactly what was happening. Nobody needed it explained. It was one of those moments where someone with authority quietly resets the tone. No confrontation, just correction. And by that point, the narrative had already shifted. This wasn't about one comment anymore. It was about him. About how he talks, how he presents himself, how often he speaks, and whether the version people loved still exists. Because here's the reality nobody tells you about fame. The higher you go, the less room you have for error in perception. Not because people expect perfection, but because people are constantly recalibrating how they feel about you. At first, everything you do is interpreted generously. You're confident. That's inspiring. You're ambitious. That's admirable. You're expressive. That's interesting. But once perception shifts, those same traits get reinterpreted. Confidence becomes ego. Ambition becomes arrogance. Expression becomes overexposure. Nothing changes except how people read you. And that is what Timothee is going through right now. You can see it in real time. The jokes hit differently. The interviews get analyzed more closely. The comments get less benefit of the doubt. Because once people become even slightly annoyed, they stop protecting your image, and that's dangerous territory. Then came the Oscars, and this is where it gets interesting. Because there's a narrative going around that he was snubbed because of the controversy, that his comments cost him the award. But that's not actually how it works. The voting had already closed. The decision was already made. Michael B. Jordan won because his performance had momentum, not because Timothee said something controversial. But here's the thing, even if the outcome didn't change, the experience did. Because now he's sitting in that room with a different energy around him, not hostile, just différles admiration, more awareness more discret. And when that happens, every moment feels heavier. Every reaction feels slightly amplified. And the internet is watching all of it. That's the part people underestimate. Fame isn't just about what happens. It's about how it feels in the room. And that feeling can shift without any official consequence. No scandal. No cancellation. Just a subtle change in how people look at you. And those are the hardest moments to navigate. Because there's nothing to fix directly. You can't apologize your way out of a vibe. You can't PR your way out of mild annoyance. You can't perform your way out of perception overnight. You have to wait. And waiting is uncomfortable when you're used to momentum. Because what Timothee is experiencing right now is not a collapse. It's a recalibration. The audience is adjusting, figuring out how they feel about this version of him. And that process takes time. The biggest problem for him, to what said. It's how often he's been saying things. Because overexposure doesn't just mean being seen too much. It means being understood too quickly. And once people feel like they understand you, the mystery is gone. And mystery was his biggest asset. The quiet, introspective, slightly distant energy. That's what made people curious. That's what made him feel different. Now, he feels more accessible, more explainable, more predictable. And in Hollywood, predictability is dangerous. Because audiences don't fall in love with what they fully understand. They fall in love with what they're still trying to figure out. That's why so many iconic actors say less. Because silence creates space, and space creates intrigue. Timothee filled that space. And now people are reacting to what they found there. Not necessarily because it's bad, but because it's different from what they expected. And expectation is everything. Here's the deeper layer. This isn't just about him. This is about what happens when someone goes from being projected onto to being fully visible. At first, people loved the idea of him. Now they're dealing with the reality of him. And those two things rarely match perfectly. That's not failure. That's just the cost of visibility. But it's also where careers either stabilize or start to decline in perception. Because if the audience decides they like the real version less, there's no easy way back. You can't go back to being mysterious once you've explained yourself. You can't undo statements. You can't erase patterns. You can only adjust moving forward. Speak less. Choose words more carefully. Let the work speak again. But even that takes time. Because once people start questioning your image, they don't stop immediately. They watch. They wait. They test. And slowly, they decide where you stand again. That's the phase he's in. And it's uncomfortable. Because it's not dramatic enough to respond to, but it's real enough to feel. So the real question isn't, did he mess up? The real question is, did he change how people feel about him? And right now, the answer seems to be yes. Not completely, not permanently, but noticeably. And in this industry, that's everything. Because careers aren't just built on talent. They're built on perception. And perception can shift quietly before anyone fully realizes it. So now I want to ask you something, and think about this carefully. Do you think Timothee is just going through a normal phase of becoming more confident and outspoken? Or do you feel like he's starting to lose the exact thing that made people like him in the first place?